Hi, this is Pete Shearer, and welcome to my Dimecast, Intro to Swift Part 1. What we're going to do here is the same project that we did in the Intro to Objective-C Part 1, but we're going to do it with Swift instead. So today we're working with Xcode 6 Beta 7, so some of these things may be subject to change, but for the functionality that we're covering, it should be about the same. So what you want to do right away is we're just going to create a new Xcode project. We're going to choose in iOS, Application, Single View Application, and click Next. For the product name, we're just going to call it Hello Swift. Organization name could be anything. The organization identifier is typically a reverse DNS, so for this case, we're going to do net.dimecasts. It generates the bundle identifier for you out of the organization identifier, plus the product name. Now, as new in Xcode 6, it's going to ask me which language I want. We're going to choose Swift, and we're going to leave it at devices for iPhone for now. This application is simple and doesn't use any sort of data or repository, so we're not going to use core data for the project. Click Next again. Choose where we're going to save it. I'm going to save it in my Dimecast folder where the GitHub repository is located, and click Create. All right. If I click the main storyboard, it brings up the view controller for this application. But let's take a minute to look at over here on the left. This is the project navigator. So we have first our project, and then a couple of folders. AppDelegate.swift, which helps the application get started. ViewController.swift, which just represents this view controller. Our main storyboard, which is a collection of our views, some assets, a few supporting files, a spot for tests, and a spot for exports for things that you generate from your application. So in this main storyboard, over here we have a square. Normally, the shape of the view controller is going to be something looking like an iPhone or an iPad. Because it's rumored that iPhone screen sizes are going to get a little more complicated, they're now moving to a different kind of layout. And so the square space is to show you, okay, you can work in this space, this is your canvas, but you need to make things a lot more relative. It used to be you would make separate storyboards for iPhone and iPad, and you still can depending on your constraints or maybe what you want to do. But the idea is that you make things a lot more relative. Down in the bottom right-hand corner, we have our object library. If I scroll down, I want to grab a label and just put it on the canvas and 3 buttons. 1, 2, 3. Now, because of this relative layout, this becomes a little more tricky. So let's just lay this out. I kind of want it relatively towards the center of the screen. Take my label. You see how we have the guides here to show you where things are at. So I'm going to left and right align it. While my label's selected, I'm going to go over here to the right to the attributes inspector and change. So instead of saying label when it first starts, it'll say nothing. I'll just clear that. But I also want it when it's presented to be center. All right, now for each button, I'm going to click the first one. And I'm going to change the button text to red, the second button text to blue, and finally the third one to green. All right, so right now we have a UI, but if we run it, you see that it looks like garbage. If I rotate the phone, okay, I can finally see them now, but we needed a lot of horizontal space in order to display them. So let's see if we can fix that. So first constraint, we'll take the easy one. We're going to select the label, and I'm going to come down here to the constraints, and I'm going to choose to horizontally center it in the container, and then click Add Constraint. Now these three buttons, it's much more difficult to align three things together. So for this, we're going to cheat a little and select all three and choose Editor, Embed in, View. So that's going to make all three of them operate like one. And now with that selected, we're going to horizontally center it, add a constraint, and now when I run the project, you see they're centered, and then I can rotate to the right, they stay centered. So this is more about what we want. There's one more trick. You'll notice right now everything looks fine, but over here in the attribute inspector, the background is white. So even when we change the background of this view, this will remain white. So what we want to do is just change that to default, which means it will just be the background of whatever is behind it. So that's more of what we want and will give us exactly what we need for our project. Next, we want to bring up, so that we can write the code, we want to bring up the assistant editor. This used to be a picture of a tuxedo even in earlier versions of 6. They changed it to these two kind of Venn diagram circles. So if you ever see anything talking about looking for the tuxedo, that has changed. So now we're showing the code for viewcontroller.swift, which just means the assistant editor shows the code that goes with the nib that we have currently selected in the storyboard. So this is the code for viewcontroller.swift right here. We have, you'll notice there's a lot of, we don't have H files and M files, there's no headers. That C legacy baggage is not included in Swift. So we just have what you'd expect, a class, a view controller that inherits from UI view controller. We override the view did load, and we just call the method up on super, and then did receive memory warning, and again super. But other than that, we're just ready to go. So let's select our label, hold down Control, click, drag over here, right above the first function, and let go. That's going to give us a chance to create an outlet. I'm going to name this outlet output label. It's of type UI label, and the storage is weak, and we hit connect. So what does that generate for us? First, IBOutlet. IBOutlet is strictly for the tooling and not the language. This lets Xcode know that this line of code is tying over here to a nib. Weak, it means that in terms of reference counting and memory management, that we are not going to hold on to this any longer than we have to. And so if as soon as we're done using it, we're going to take our hands off. And if there are no one is left touching it, the variable will be taken away and be removed from memory. However, if someone else has a reference to it, they can have it. var. There are a couple different ways to declare variables in Swift. var is allowed, the name, output label, and then when we do type it here, we're saying it's of type UI label, and then this exclamation point. We'll see this again a little bit later, and we'll talk about it more in a later episode. But exclamation points and question marks have to do with optional types and explicitly unwrapped variables and things like that. So for now, this gets us what we need. Now let's click one of our buttons. Make sure that you don't click this outer view and you actually get a button. Hold down Control, click and drag. This time we're going to put it under the last function, let go. This time we don't need an outlet. I don't want a reference to the button. We're not going to do anything with the button. What I want is an action. The name on this one is button was clicked. The type, this is what's being passed in. In this case, we know what's being passed in. It's not any object that's going to call this click function, this action. It's going to be a UI button. Touch up inside, that is the default, kind of the standard for when you're clicking a button. So when you think about touch, when you touch the button, whether purposely or accidentally, when you let up your finger, that's the thing you wanted to act on. So if I accidentally touch the button, I could slide my finger off and let go somewhere else on the view, and that would not count as a button touch. That's why you don't want to do it on touch down inside. So in this case, you can touch down, but whenever you actually come up, that's the thing you are acting on. So it's touch up inside. The argument, we are going to send the sender. Connect. So we have here again, IBAction. That's just like IBOutlet. This is again telling the tooling how to wire this up. Func, which for Swift is the way that you declare your methods or functions. The name button was clicked. In this case, we're sending one parameter called sender of type UI button. So for right now, we only have one button wired up. But this method signature will actually support all three buttons. In our case, that's exactly what we want. So I'm going to click the blue button. And over here, there's a connections inspector. I'm going to click that. And for its events, touch up inside, you just click the circle, drag to the view controller, let go. And then you're going to see every method that appears in the view controller code that can support it. In this case, we have only one. So I'll choose that. And then choose the green button. Repeat the process. So now you'll see all three, red, blue, and green, are all pointing to the same button was clicked. Okay, so let's do something here. So first thing we're going to do is capture what's in the button. Here's that question mark again. This is what it expects to have, this optional title label on this button. If I take that away, you'll see right away we get an error, which UI label question mark does not have a member name text. So we have to put this question mark back because the title label is optional, and that's the correct way to address it. Next, I'm going to just create a background color and set it equal to UI color, white color. And that'll be our default. Now, I want to point something out here. When you have optional types and you explicitly unwrap things, they're supposed to act, when the first time you call them, they are supposed to become explicitly unwrapped, or implicitly unwrapped, I'm sorry, and you're supposed to be able to use them. But in this case, there's actually a bug. And I have a link to the Stack Overflow that addresses it. But for me to do what we want to do next, you actually have to use a workaround. And that's in this version of Xcode 6 Beta 7, where this problem has arisen. So I have the link here. This will go up into my GitHub, which will be linked in the notes on this video, and you'll be able to check it out. So what we're going to do here, okay, so we're going to end up getting rid of our first text part, which would have been the right way to do this. Okay, just quickly for this first case, let's cover what we've done. We're saying if let text equal sender.titleLabel?text. So what we're doing here is we're getting this value, and then we're forcing it to be used right away. And when you're doing this, this is allowing it. This switch statement is not calling the implicit use, so we're going to use it outside of this first. And that's going to say, so now if there's actually a value there, so if this isn't null, then we'll execute this code. If it does execute and nothing happens, if it returns a nil, then we'll have another set of code right here. in reality, this should be almost impossible. Something I noticed right away as well, I keep adding semicolons. I'm going to take them out. You don't need them. Okay, let's go back to our case statement. Interestingly enough, if you watched the Objective-C version of this project, you'll notice we couldn't do a switch statement because Objective-C did not have switch statements for string types. Swift does not have that limitation, so I thought that I'd use it. So we have case blue. We'll make the background color blue. Finally, case green. Now, in a switch statement in Swift, you must provide a default, or else you're going to get an error that says the switch must be exhaustive. Consider adding a default clause. Because the string could be something else, you've got to cover that. Even in this case, we don't want it to do anything, doesn't matter. So we're going to add, if it is, we're going to break. And now the error goes away. Okay, so let's get outside of our switch statement. So now we're going to set the background color of this view equal ultimately to the background color we decided through our code. And then we're going to set the label. Output labels text equal to the background is now. So we're going to use string interpolation, which Swift offers, Ruby has, some other languages. It's a lot handy. It's very handy. It's a lot more convenient than some of the string format and some of the rigmarole you have to do around that. So all you have to do is write your string, and then when you want to introduce a variable, in this case text we already have, you just backslash text. There you go. So let's run the project. Red, blue, green. We can rotate it. Everything stays in line. Code still works. We're good to go. So in this episode, we became a little bit familiar with Xcode 6, how to create a Swift project, how to lay out a very simple layout in a Swift storyboard, and finally, how to create events that are fired when buttons are clicked, and just a slight introduction to the Swift syntax. In the next Dimecast, we're going to take a look at how to create a slightly more complex project and to use more of the features of the language and the editor. Until then,